Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, or wherever you are in the world. My name is Joanna Daniel, and I'm the founder of Wounds to Scars. I'm doing this special series this today, tomorrow, and Thursday, talking about just going deeper in the story of the woman at the well. I've just completed a series in churches from December to the end of January around the woman at the well. The title is "Come See a Man," and that's the title for our upcoming conference. I'm going to tell you some more about that at the end. Now I'm doing this series, and I might make the videos private after this week. And so if you know, catch it, share it, comment, ask questions, and let me know your thoughts on the you think about this story. What was significant for me was that as I shared this Saturday, and as I finished, and at the door shaking hands, this woman came up to me and she said, "That's my favorite story in the Bible." She said, "It's my favorite story," and she says, after we hugged and she left, she said, "Because I am that woman." And I was so happy that she could see herself in the presentation that day. I never say sermons because I'm not a preacher, but in the presentation that day. So I have to do this disclaimer. I'm not a theologian. So I'm approaching this from a therapeutic standpoint, from somebody who has worked with women who experience domestic abuse, sexual abuse, rejection and abandonment. And some of the themes that I see in those stories as I work with women, I'm going to bring out in my what in not my interpretation, because the interpretation doesn't change, but from my working with women, reading between the lines, kind of wondering about her life and what her life may have been. Now, you may see yourself reflected in some of these wanderings. And so I want you to stay until the end to see what happens. And I know you probably have read the story. It's St. John 4 from verse 1 to 29. You may have read the story many times. I read the story many, many times. And but it's when I last year, was it last year? The year before, when I watched The Chosen and how they brought out just so many things became clearer to me just watching that. And so I and I may do a reaction video to that. I never thought of doing that, but that just came to me now. Thank you for those who are joining. So I want to start with the men in the story, in this woman's story. Who were those men, and why did she have five husbands? I know that I said, when I'm speaking on this, I said we sometimes read the Bible through a cultural lens. From where I'm from, a woman with five husbands would not be seen as respectable, or she wouldn't get much respect. She would be seen sometimes as a loose woman, or whatever else description we use to describe or define a woman that have had five husbands. We see that with women who've had five children with five different men, perhaps, and how society treats a woman like that, and how she's referred to and how she's seen. We see that maybe this woman didn't have friends because she was, and we can assume that there was a lot of shame around her life narrative, and maybe how people in Samaria was treating her based on her story and her life. And what I know is that sometimes when we see people act a certain way, we don't tend to wonder about anything else. We don't tend to ask questions. We make a lot of assumptions, and we don't go behind the scenes to see what else could be going on. I know sometimes women, because they don't want to be ostracized, also partake in the ostracizing of another woman and abandoning another woman and leaving her on her own. We don't know if she has any friends. If she had friends, they weren't available that day to go with her to the well. Did she make that lonely trip every day on her own because there was nobody who was friendly or wanted to befriend her, so she took go on her own? Did she live a lonely life, abandoned by everybody? So that's another part of the wondering. But for today, I'm looking at the men. Who were they? We know that in that time, women really, there was a massive power imbalance. they're in relationships. There's a power imbalance right now. It's still happening, but there was an imbalance of power when it came to divorce. Like a woman, it wasn't so easy for a woman to divorce her husband as it was for him to divorce her. So it's safe to assume that she could roll up to the courts and say, I would like to divorce you. And that's something that was brought out in The Chosen when she went to the current husband, when the former husband, and asked him to sign the bill of divorcement because she couldn't do it. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, I don't let go of my property. So sometimes women were not seen as respectable, respected. They were property. And so he didn't want to let go. So he refused to sign of divorcement. So we wondered how many men, how were she treated, and how did the imbalance of power impact the 5 relationships that she had before. And I can imagine the more it happens, the more, number 1, divorce, number 2, divorce, number 3 and 4, and all of that, and how that is chipping away at her self-esteem. And why did these men leave? And I know sometimes there's some men who are able to spot a vulnerable woman, because after living in a society like that, where women, the imbalance of power, women don't have much rights or say, or even sit with their husbands or partners in the synagogue and speak out in church or teach. Or, I mean, if a woman preaching now can cause so much uproar, what about a woman speaking then? I'm sure women had no voice then. So I can imagine that she now is a vulnerable woman, and sometimes a vulnerable woman is a target for men who are abusers, men who will manipulate and control, men who will come only for what they want and then they're gone. She is a target. And I imagine how her self-esteem must be eroding every time. Her self-esteem, the damage of divorce 1 and 2 and 3, and what it's doing to her self-esteem. I know many can relate to that. When you're living in an abusive relationship, the impact on your self-esteem. So I imagine also not having a choice but to go along with it. In today's society, when we look at divorce and how the church teaches about divorce, how a woman can divorce now, a woman can file for divorce, but I know that divorce is frowned upon so much that there are religious communities that would much prefer if a woman stay in an abusive, harmful relationship than if she make a decision to leave and to find safety. And I know there are churches sometimes who will not remarry a woman who has divorced an abusive husband, because they will only remarry you if the abusive husband commits adultery. And sometimes I'm hearing stories where, because the church want you to prove that your husband has committed adultery, and you can't prove anything, you don't have no pictures or anything like that, so sometimes the church will refuse to marry a woman. Now, a woman like that, even today, might be forced to live in a situation that they don't want to live in, because if the church won't marry you, then what are you going to do? What are the choices that are left available, right? You change church, you go to another denomination, you find somewhere where they'll marry you, or you go to the courts to get married. But then that is frowned upon, and now you're seen as a woman who broke the rules of the church. So sometimes society, patriarchy, and even how the church is structured take choices away from women and don't give us a lot of choices sometimes when we are in situations where there's abuse or there's harm and there's damage. And all of that can be a heavy load to carry, can be really burdensome for women. So, and I imagine, and as I mentioned before, her vulnerability, the exposure, how big was Samaria? Was it big enough for her to live in a part of town where nobody knew her? Could she meet a man that was new, didn't know her life, didn't know her circumstances, would take the time to get to know her, or would he be somebody who would everybody know her situation? Sometimes when you live in a small town, everybody know your business. Well, the one that is out, like everybody would know that you dated John and then James and so on. So she was vulnerable to abuse, and to men who couldn't love her, men who were there just for their own needs, their own purposes. But I want us to just spend the last couple of minutes and looking at grace. And for me, the way Jesus turned up and what he did, how he loved, how he how he loved her, how he spent time, how he didn't shame her, how he went right to the heart. He really ministered to who she was. He wanted to, and he revealed himself to her. He gave her something that nobody else could or did give her. He treated her with dignity and with respect. And I can imagine what that must look like if the well was near enough for people to watch and to see, or anybody wandering past, that he was a lone single Jewish man speaking to an outcast Samaritan woman. I mean, that is quite the picture, isn't it? Where they didn't like each other, well, historically, and here he was. He sought her out. He went to find her so he could give her grace, so he could let her know that he had seen her, that he'd seen what she had gone through, and that he had seen, he was the only one who could relieve all of that. And the verse end by saying that, she left her water pot, she ran into the city, and she said, "Come see a man who've told me everything about myself. Could this be the Christ?" And that is the beauty of the story. And that's what I want you to leave with today. Whatever it is that you have experienced, however you've been treated by society, however the damages of living in an abusive relationship, or maybe you have had 5 husbands, but not in terms of married, and you've been seen as an outcast because of certain choices and decisions, and some of them because of trauma that you've experienced, and some patterns that and cycles that have been repeating in your life over and over. And you may have been viewed, and people may have said something. Maybe there's a narrative about you that is destructive and damaging and harmful to you, that it's done things to impact your self-esteem, and you may feel downcast and like there's no hope. But I want you to remember that Jesus went to Samaria and he met the deepest need of this woman, and he'll do the same thing for you. He really will do the same thing for you. So thank you for joining me today. If you're viewing this after, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and to share this video with those who you know will benefit. And join us again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. UK time, where I'm going to talk about the father-daughter and mother-daughter relationship, and how that impact when we have disconnection in those relationships, or insecure attachment, how that show up in certain patterns and cycles relationally in our lives. I will tell you our upcoming conference, Come See a Man, that is based on this passage in John 4. It's over 2 days in Swansea, South Wales. It's April 8 and 9. On the 8th of April, we're telling the story of the resurrection through music and poetry and the word, because it's Easter weekend. Now, I didn't know that when the dates were booked, but it so happens to culminate with that, and we're really excited about that. And on the Sunday, we're diving into some of these themes of trauma. We have men and mental health sessions. We have 16 to 18-year-old sessions with a therapist, and we have sessions around trauma and healing. There'll be resources that you can have that will be available to people who register, and everybody who register will get a copy, especially for the early bird booking. Everybody who register for early bird booking gets a copy of our devotional, Come See a Man, that's written by 12 women who have healed and have experienced this scenario here in John 4. So I'm hoping that you're going to be there. If you are viewing from abroad, from outside of the UK, there's special virtual tickets available for people who are outside of the UK. So send me a message and I'll send you the registration details for that. So thank you for joining me in this. I hope you'll join me tomorrow when we'll talk about the father-daughter, mother-daughter relationship and how that sets us up to recreate certain patterns and cycles in our lives, and how we can break those patterns and cycles and be free to be able to heal those wounds of abandonment and be able to give love and have healthy, safe relationships. Have an amazing day.